On the front of the blouse, there's 2 darts, one on either side, and press crisply the center arm of the dart before you sew it. Once you have it pressed crisply, you can sew it the same way that we've sewed every other dart, which is you start at the widest part, take a few stitches, and sew slowly and carefully along the line until you come to the apex point, and then you're going to just tie a knot at the apex point. For the back, there's 2 back darts, and we're going to start with one of the darts, and I'm going to start by pressing very crisply down the center line, and I'm going to sew from the center of the dart to the apex point. So from the center of the dart, I'm going to treat it like a completely separate dart, where you take a few stitches, you reverse, and you sew slowly and carefully down to the apex point. And once you reach the apex point, you'll be tying the threads off in a knot. Then I'm going to reverse the situation where I'm sewing again from the center point to the apex. So starting at the center, I'm going to reverse, and slowly and carefully I'm going to sew along my line till I get to the apex point. And then I'm going to tie my threads off with a knot. Next step on the back dart will be to clip the dart to the center and then clip the dart again an inch above and an inch below, and that releases the tension. The darts are going to get pressed like this one towards the center back, and on the front the dart will get pressed down towards the waist. What we're going to do next is we're going to be attaching the yoke. You have 2 yokes cut, correct? Yes. 2 yokes cut. What you're going to do is this. You can either trace this pattern piece off on paper first, or you can just cut it out of your yoke. It's going to match your yoke exactly, and you're going to just trace the outside edge, mark the notches, and cut it, okay?
You're only going to do it on
you
one
don't
side
have to,
or both sides?
Yeah, you don't. On the back, you have a right side and a wrong side, correct? Because of the darts. You're going to take the yoke, and you're going to place the yoke right side to right side with the back. So the right sides are kissing, and we're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance right there. So what we're going to do is we're going to pin the yoke to the blouse, right sides together, and you have notches along the yoke. You see there are double notches, and there are double notches on the blouse. You're going to match your markers the same way you always do. And I would recommend pinning. So I have my notches marked and just the end marked, okay? And then I'm going to sew. It's a 1/2 inch seam allowance, which you can tell from the notch. Take a few stitches, reverse, and sew along the seam allowance. And I would always recommend taking out your pins. Don't sew over them. Raw edges perfectly together. And it should match exactly. take a couple stitches, reverse, and then my next step is I'm going to overlock that. So let's go to the overlock machine. Step 4, overlocking the center back yoke seam. You're going to overlock the center back yoke seam. And I am sewing the seam allowances together and cutting off 1/8 of an inch. So the seam allowance is now 3/8 of an inch along the yoke seam. Step 5. On the wrong side, you're going to press the seam allowance up and you can make sure it's perfect on the right side as well. I pull the seam a tiny bit. You want it pressed really nice and smooth, and then I'm going to top stitch it. Is top stitching the yoke. So what we're going to do, just like when we top stitch the skirt, approximately 1/8 of an inch from the seam, you're going to top stitch the back yoke. And I am top stitching so the stitch appears on the yoke side. Come to the end and reverse, okay? And then it's top stitch. You're going to place the 2 fronts on the back, and of course it's always going to be right sides together. You're going to take your shoulder seams, match your shoulder seams, and remember, once again, you are matching stitching lines, not the raw edges. So you're matching where you stitch. It's a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You're going to sew both shoulder seams, overlock it, and top stitch it. So let's take it from there. So here is my shoulder seam at my neck, and I am matching my seam allowances exactly, taking a few stitches, reverse, and sew slowly and carefully along my shoulder seam, and then my next step will be to overlock it. Okay. After you've overlocked it and pressed it towards the yoke, I'm going to top stitch it. Take a few stitches, and again, I am stitching on the yoke side. Okay, and you're going to do that on both sides of the shoulder. Okay? Next step is this. Essentially, we have the blouse is starting to be assembled. We have the front and back attached to one another. And then we have the princess panels. And if you look at the princess panels, one of them has a more exaggerated curve than the other one. The exaggerated curve is what goes on the front because it attaches to the bust. This is the right side on the inside, correct? So this is going to get attached to here. So this side is going to attach to the bust, the other side is going to attach to the back. It doesn't matter which side you do first, but you need to do both of them. So what I'm going to do is here's my back, and here's my back seam, and it is right sides together, correct? So I'm placing right sides together. This is my back princess seam, and I'm going to sew it. There are notches, and on the back It's like a 1/2 inch looks completely flat. Again, you are matching stitching lines, right? Always stitching lines. A 1/2 inch, take a few stitches, reverse. And then if you are sewing the backs, they have double notches that match up. You see these notches? That lines up. And we're going to be doing the same process. We're going to be sewing the back princess seam, and then the front princess seam, and then overlocking it. So I'm going to sew them first, and then I'm going to overlock them. You start, it's a 1/2 inch at the stitching line, correct? Take a few stitches, reverse. And I wouldn't even bother pinning this. I think it's harder to pin it. What I do is I just sew it inch by inch, lining up my raw edges so they match perfectly. The hardest part to sew is the area right around the bust because it's very curved. Okay? And that's it. And then we're going to take the 2 seams and overlock them. Okay. There's no side seam on this. It's like they've taken the side seam and joined it. So it's on the princess seam and it's on the princess seam. So we're going to take these 2 seams. This is the front princess panel seam, and I'm going to overlock it. And when I overlock it, I'm just going to cut about 1/8 of an inch off of it. And there's no top stitching or anything on these seams. And then I'm going to do the back seam. And just make sure you don't get anything else caught underneath. It's very easy to do. So that's it. And all the seams get ironed, the panel seams get pressed towards the center.